Robin Phillips, and I work for FEMA at the Texas Recovery Office in Austin. I'm a National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, outreach specialist. I started at FEMA shortly after Hurricane Harvey and have been working on the long-term recovery ever since. I support my regional counterparts by organizing events like this and NFIP educational opportunities, so feel free to reach out to me to learn more. So here we are attending a webinar about hurricanes and severe weather on the 3-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey making landfall, and on a day we're preparing for another hurricane to impact Texas in less than 48 hours. All of this reminds us that severe weather is something Texas residents must be aware of at all times. Before we move any further along, I want to thank Texas Realtors for hosting this webinar. Texas Realtors has been a critical partner of FEMA's. They help us provide essential education to the real estate community on hurricane preparedness and the importance of flood insurance. We're thankful you all are joining us today to learn more about the types of insurance coverage you and your clients need to recover from the hazards and storms we face in our great state. Insurance is a key element to recovering quicker after a storm. Each agency represented today is grateful for your support and for the role you play in helping Texas residents become better prepared for the types of severe weather we face. A few housekeeping matters before we get going any further. I'd like to remind everyone to mute their microphone and so that we all know who has joined us today, if you can take a moment to update your profile name and include your first and last name and your company and organization, that would be great. Our experts are here today to answer your questions about hurricane season and severe weather. In order to do that, please enter your questions in the Zoom chat window. Questions we cannot get to today, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. Also, Texas Realtors is recording the webinar and will upload the link to their website in the next day or so. And please feel free to share it with your colleagues. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Garrett. Tim is a Texas Realtors and Texas Windstorm Insurance Association Board of Directors member. Tim is going to discuss the importance of severe weather awareness and planning for realtors. Tim, take it over.
Well, my name is Tim Garrett. I'd like to welcome you here today. As she mentioned before, I'm a realtor from Lubbock, Texas, and I'm also a member of the board of directors for the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, which some of you guys may have heard of as TWIA, as a non-Seacoast territory representative. I am the only realtor member on the board, so I always want to bring a perspective to those discussions, knowing the issues that we as agents and our clients face whenever it comes to insurance needs and transactions, and of course also to our property owners. The topics being discussed today are both timely and vital for our profession and our customers, including hurricane and severe weather preparedness, flood, wind, homeowners, and renters insurance, even the seller's disclosure notice, as well as improvements your clients can make to prepare for a hurricane and mitigate future damages. We have a great panel lined up today from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Texas Water Development Board, Texas Department of Insurance, Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, and they're all going to discuss multiple different things. I'm actually going to turn it over to Robin Harris, who is the Texas Realtors Associate Counsel, who will moderate today's webinar and introduce all of our panel members. Robin?
Robin Harris, can I make one real quick?
Absolutely.
It looks like maybe the chat is disabled, so feel free to enter questions in the question and answer box or the chat if it becomes available, so we don't want to miss your questions. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, so it's not too confusing. We have both Robins who are kind of running the show here today, but believe me, Robin Phillips has driven the bus and is doing a great job. So welcome everybody on behalf of Texas Realtors, on behalf of all of our panelists. I'd like to welcome you here today, a very important and timely topic. Don't want to waste too much of your time. I'm going to let each panelist kind of give the Reader's Digest 30-second to 60-second version of who they are, what they do with their organization, and I will start with Yi. Go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Yi Chan. I'm the NFIP State Coordinator for Texas. I'm with the Texas Water Development Board. So just to give you all a little bit of background on the agency, the Texas Water Development Board leads the state's efforts in ensuring a secure water future for Texas and its citizens. We do this through providing water and flood planning, data collection and dissemination, financial assistance, and technical assistance to the citizens of Texas. So specifically within the flood realm, as I said, we're the state coordinating agency for the National Flood Insurance Program. So myself and the Community Assistance Group work as a liaison between FEMA and local governments to help administer their floodplain management regulations and programs. So we're here as a resource for Texans and local governments to provide you with any sort of support we can. In addition to that, related to the flood realm, most recently, the 2019 Texas legislature also tasked us with administering a new state and regional flood planning process. So those flood planning processes are in place and will roll out in 2023 and 2024. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thanks, Yi. That was great. And next, I want to make sure that I'm doing the order correct with the slides that we have. Who's next on the slide, Robin? Is it Gilbert? There we go. Gilbert, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Gilbert Guido, and I'm the Regional Flood Insurance Liaison for FEMA at Region 6. My main responsibility is to deal with all of our WIO, our right-to-own partners, in regards to ensuring our customers throughout Region 6 have all the answers to questions they have in regards to flood insurance. I deal a lot with congressional inquiries from insured who have questions about denials or submitting appeals. I put them in contact with the right people to get their questions answered if I can't answer them myself. I've been with Region 6 since 2015. I work in compliance, and I've been in the insurance side for about 1.5 years now.
Great, thanks, Gilbert. Have Manny Villarreal next. And sorry, Manny, you're muted. It's the thing of 2020, right? Yep, there you go.
Thank you. Appreciate, I'm glad to be here today. I'm the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association Ombudsman since 2012. My principal job is to do educational outreach to the policyholders in the 14 counties and designated cities east of 146 in Harris County. It's important for the realtors and anyone listening to call me if there's any particular issues regarding TWIA. TWIA does an excellent job, but it's important for me to know also to provide information to TWIA if there's any kind of issues that policyholders, realtors, insurance agents may have. So please reach out to me in the future. And again, I provide educational outreach regarding TWIA's eligibility requirements and also regarding the importance of building to windstorm standards. Again, thank you very much. Any questions, please holler. Thanks.
Thank you, Manny. And next we have Reagan.
Oops, sorry.
Skip one. Go ahead, Reagan.
Thanks, Robin Phillips. I'm happy to be skipped over. David, it was you next. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our insurance stakeholder webinar. And especially thank you again to the realtors for hosting us. My name is Reagan Elmer, and I work in government relations at TDI. In my role, I primarily work with all the different divisions at TDI and help them interact with the Texas legislature. And my primary focus is on property and casualty insurance. Just as a general aside, the Texas Department of Insurance mission is to protect insurance consumers by regulating the insurance industry fairly and diligently and to promote a stable and competitive market. And so primarily I'm the GR guy walking around at the Capitol helping our agency promote our mission. And so I will turn it back to you.
I think, David, I saw you next on the list, so your turn.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'd like to echo Reagan's comments. Thank you very much for the Texas Realtors and FEMA for putting this together for us. It's a very timely and a great room to be a part of. I am the Senior Business Continuity and catastrophe plan analyst for Texas Windstorm Insurance Association. Part of our task is to create an environment where we can go from a normal kind of 220 person operation to scaling up and deploying up to, after Harvey, we had about 1,200 employees moving from the 25th on into September. So my job is to plan and put together the response structure for us to be able to succeed in this environment. I also work with coordinating the response between the emergency management community and Texas Windstorm itself. Outside of that, I'm also responsible for our business continuity operations themselves. So anytime one of those hurricanes makes its way from Corpus on up to Austin, we have plans for that. So again, thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks everyone. So, I just want to jump right in. We've got a ton of knowledge about windstorm insurance, flood insurance, disaster preparedness. But the big question is a hurricane coming? If I'm closing on a house this weekend, if I'm closing on a house on Friday, on Monday, it's coming up. Can I get flood insurance? Can I get wind insurance? Gilbert?
Yeah, that's a good question. Normally, there is a 30-day wait when you buy a new business flood insurance policy. Now, there's a few exceptions. One of those is if you are closing on a new home, you'll have a 24-hour delay. But besides that, the answer to that question is if you don't have one of those circumstances that causes an exemption, the 30-day wait will be in effect. So in essence, it would be too late to purchase any type of coverage for the upcoming events.
Manny, what about if I wanted some windstorm insurance or some other type of insurance?
Yeah, as far as and David is here also regarding Texas Windstorm. There was a moratorium put on once the hurricane enters the Gulf, and after that point, coverage is not available. As far as purchasing insurance or even increasing coverage. So once the storm enters the Gulf, as I mentioned, coverage ceases as far as eligibility for obtaining insurance, but also not just the entering the Gulf, but outside. There's maybe situations where companies will begin to cease insurance coverage once it becomes like a depression. So it's important for the consumers to be prepared, and once they begin to see activity, to contact their insurance agent.
And we got a good question. What about, and I'm sorry, David, to stop there, but what if the seller has a current policy that's in place? Does that transfer with the home, or what happens in that situation?
As far as the seller, no, it doesn't transfer. If he still owns the home, well, there's coverage, but once they transfer they purchase a home, there has to be insurance coverage on that structure by the future homeowner. Many times they've delayed the closing in order to maintain insurance on that structure.
David?
Yeah, and to kind of build off of what Manny was just saying, for TWIA specifically, our plan of operation has us putting up a moratorium once that hurricane is labeled inside of the 80-20 zone, basically anywhere within the Gulf. But the key thing to remember is as soon as this storm has more or less been deemed no longer a threat, so once it's far enough inland, you can expect that that moratorium will be put to the side, and we will begin issuing policies and changes to policies again. Now, the important piece is the date of loss. You have to have that policy in force by that date of loss. So any coverage that would be purchased post landfall, would likely not be applicable to any storm there. But the key thing is that as soon as that threat is no longer there, the coverage will be able to be purchased again. I think I just saw a question about what the 80-20 zone is. That's the line of latitude and longitude. It's right around Cuba. that is the point at which anytime that the National Hurricane Center labels that storm a hurricane, or if it's over in the Bay of Campeche, that is when that moratorium will go up for TWIA. That's not always going to be true or the case for private companies. But one of the things that we try to do is coordinate with them to make sure that we're not staying in what we call storm mode for too long, or not shutting that off at the appropriate time.
So
Robin, this is Gilbert.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Valerie asked a very good question. The question is, if someone selling has an existing flood insurance policy, that's actually a policy that is in effect, and that could roll over to a new owner as long as they meet the criteria, which means it has to roll over at closing, and there has to be a letter from the current policy owner stating that they are rolling over the existing policy to the new owner. So it's not considered new business. It's simply a rollover, and that would provide immediate coverage, but only if it's done at closing. So very good question, Valerie. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that what this shows is that insurance is complicated, right? And so it's important to check your policy, check with your insurance agent, and check with the professionals if you have any questions about anything. So let's talk a little bit more about those different policies that are offered, or what your agencies specifically do. What do homeowners need, for example? I mean, in this instance and this discussion, I think we're mostly focused on the coastal bend, right? On that area from Louisiana down to South Padre and the valley. So for homes in those zones, how is that, David, how is that zone defined? Where does TWIA offer insurance?
Yeah, so for TWIA, the eligibility requirements really start at the 14 coastal counties. These tier 1 counties right along the Gulf Coast, after 1970, a lot of those private insurers started to move away from the coast. And so in 1971, the Texas legislature put us in play there. All of those coastal counties, including a small sliver of Harris County. If anybody's familiar with LaPorte, Morgan's Point, that area right over in there where it kind of curves around into Chambers County, we also include there. So it's a very well-defined region, and these places really can't get this coverage from the private market for the most part. As you get more inland, away from these core coastal towns, that becomes more of a possibility. But those 14 coastal counties and then Harris County are the main ones that we provide insurance for.
And who can talk about a tier 1 property? What's a tier 1 property?
David just mentioned about tier 1. That's the 14 coastal counties, and also the designated cities east of 146 in Harris County. I saw that Q&A question. That's the area where companies are allowed to exclude windstorm, hurricane, and hail coverage.
Okay. So are homes in that tier 1 area required to have windstorm insurance?
So that's really, a lot of times that is dependent upon the mortgage company. If you have a mortgage company, it is most likely that you will be required to carry that wind and hail coverage. And through the agent, the insurance agent there, they're going to look to place that coverage with a private insured. But if there's that one declination, that's when they can come back to TWIA and look to place that wind and hail coverage there. But really that kind of requirement is going to be more of a function of the mortgage provider and less so of the buyer itself. So if somebody's buying the property outright, it's obviously definitely a wise decision to place that wind and hail coverage, whether through it's the private insurer or if through that declination you're coming over to TWIA. So I think it's really based off of the requirements of the mortgage company, but really the the key is to ensure that the property is properly insured, regardless of what the insurable interest is.
And is there always a 30-day waiting period when you get one of those policies?
So for TWIA, that policy is issued as soon as the payment is received on our end. So as soon as we have that payment, that policy is then issued and enforced.
Okay.
It is different for FEMA, for NFIP. Gil, can you cover that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, FEMA initiated a 30-day wait, and this was done because of flooding that happened in the Midwest. There was a flooding event, and we had people call and buy flood insurance as water was getting close to their structures. FEMA ended up paying out a lot of money because of this, and to help offset that cost and ensure money is put into the NFIP coffers before being paid out, the 30-day wait was initiated. The exemptions are very few, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. At closing, or you can roll over a existing policy, but the 30-day wait is something that there's no way to go around this. We just can't call headquarters and say, hey, can you not initiate the 30-day wait for this area?
So let me go back for a second, Gil. What exactly does flood insurance cover?
Okay, that's really important. Actually, great question. A lot of people are under the impression that standard homeowners insurance will cover flooding, the peril flooding. That's simply not the case. Flooding is a unique disaster. It not only causes significant damages to your house, 1 inch of water can cost up to $26,000. Now, that type of clean out for a flooding event is very significant because the water seeps into the bones of the house, the sheetrock, the wood, and we're just talking about the house itself, not talking about the content. And flood water is really, really dirty water. It's contaminated with all manners of just really nasty things, everything from deceased animals. There could be chemicals, any manner of toxins could be in this water. So it's not a simple process of just ripping out dry wood and putting up new dry wood. You have to go to the entire process of cleaning out the flood, everything from mucking out the floors, cutting out the sheetrock. You have to dry the wood, you have to test the wood, you have to clean the wood to prevent it from mold. And only after the wood has been dry and they have special sensors that can tell the moisture level in the wood, can repairs actually start. So not only is it expensive, it's time consuming, and it's an emotional roller coaster when you're dealing with flood. Now, flood insurance will help you recover from that by covering the types of damages that are associated with flooding. It will cover the sheetrock inside. It will cover the electrical components that have been inundated with water. If you have content insurance, it will help you purchase new contents. Now, if you'll take your house, turn it upside down, shake it, what falls out is your content. So that could be your furniture, your electronics, dressers, beds. Your content insurance will cover all of that. None of those items I have mentioned are covered under a standard homeowners insurance policy. So there's a big difference. Now, using some numbers from Hurricane Harvey, the average flood insurance payout was a little bit over $116,000. That is a great way to start rebuilding your home. The average disaster assistance payout for Hurricane Harvey was under $5,000. And disaster assistance is exactly that. It's just assistance. It's not meant to rebuild your home. And if the event is not large enough to get a disaster declaration, disaster assistance may not even be available. So that leaves only flood insurance as your saving grace. And if you don't have flood insurance, you're going to be totally reliant on maybe some charity organizations or emergency response from the communities. But ultimately, the homeowner is really left holding the bag for repairs on that home.
So thanks, Gilbert. And we're going to get to the differences between, we know the flood. We're going to talk a little bit about windstorm, hail, tornadoes, and things like that. But can you talk a little bit about how it's determined when a property needs flood insurance, or how those flood zones are how those come to be on a map?
Sure, yeah. So FEMA's the one that creates and administers flood insurance rate maps. Those are the zones that do determine when you're required, if you've got a federally backed mortgage, to purchase flood insurance. Any zone that's designated a 1% annual chance flood zone, usually denoted by an A or a V, you're going to have to get flood insurance as required by your lender. However, somebody asked, should I get flood insurance if I'm not in a flood zone? Well, anywhere it can rain, it can flood. Those maps are a snapshot in time. They're modeled based off of the existing conditions at the time, sometimes several years before the maps were even released. And so, just because you're across the street from a flood zone and your neighbors are in the flood zone and you're out, doesn't mean that flood water is just going to magically stop at that line. So, as Gil's been talking about, the advantages of having flood insurance are much greater than, what disaster assistance or maybe other charities and goodwill of people could provide.
So let's talk, and I don't know who's best to answer this, Reagan, David, or Manny, about people who don't live on the coast. We get a lot of tornadoes up in North Texas, a lot of hailstorms all over the state. So what types of policies are available for them, and what do they cover?
Reagan, you want just go ahead and chime in on that one if you want.
Sure. Your garden variety home insurance policy will cover tornado and hail damage. I'll also point out, kind of while we were talking about flooding and rising waters, water in your home can be covered by your normal home insurance policy for your dishwasher breaks and leaks. Those are home damages. That's going to be covered by your home policy. You wouldn't need NFIP coverage for those. But yeah, your garden variety home policy is going to cover hail and tornado. But like I tell everybody when they ask questions or have complaints, read your policy. Make sure and read your policy, understand which product you're buying, because there are exceptions there's exceptions with all kinds of companies, and it's what makes insurance competitive. And if you don't like your price, go buy a different product.
One thing I want to add on.
Yeah, go ahead, Manny.
One thing I want to add on, and it's going to defer to Gilbert after I say this, is we relate to flood. Anything associated with a flood is coverage. I once talked to Gilbert regarding sewer backup. The water doesn't physically get to the structure, but it comes to the sewer system. Gilbert, am I correct? There's no coverage under the flood policy?
You're right, sir. It does not when it comes up through the pipes like that. Not for the sewage.
Yeah. And that question I posed because I've heard a lot of folks, since I do a lot of educational outreach, concerns about sewer backup. A lot of times there's flooding around them and they're saying everything's good, but there's sewer backup, and they relate that being a flood coverage component, but it's not. You would have to check with your insurance agent regarding sewer backup coverage under their policy, whether it's covered or not.
Great. So let's, what about condos? There are storms that come in, and a lot of condos along the coast. Do they require special policies for those types of units?
As far as condominiums, the tricky part about that is that there is what they call a condominium policy for the owner of that particular unit. And typically it covers the interior unfinished walls on in, the appliances, and that's where you would need to have coverage for that component. Now, as far as the master policy, that covers all the structures outside, your windows, your roof, your siding, and so forth. That's handled by the association as what they call the master policy. It is important that the buyer of a condominium check with the association to see what kind of coverage they have as far as to the extent. Also, the importance that they do share loss assessments. If there's damage to common property, the homeowner of the condo has to also purchase what they call assessment coverage. So that's where they need to contact the insurance agent. But importantly, there are two policies: the master policy for the exterior of the entire structures in the condominium association complex, but also for the interior, which is issued by the insurance agent for the interior, from the unfinished walls and on in, as far as your appliances. As far as TWIA, David, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so it lines up exactly how Manny was describing it, but I think one of the main things that we see is there's a lot of surprise that happens between the policyholders' expectations of what those bylaws and what that master policy might cover versus what it could actually cover. So I think one of the big things that I would encourage a lot of real estate agents to pass along to their folks, if you're working on any sort of condo there, is to encourage that policyholder, that purchaser, to reach out to their insurance agent and go through those bylaws and line that up versus the coverage that they have either through TWIA or through that private provider. I think because of the specificity of the different types of condo policies that we see in the bylaws, and how bylaws might change depending upon certain construction types, or new changes or new structures that pop up along that condo association. So I think that the main thing that I would say, and what we see or what we saw after Harvey, was that sort of disconnect between the bylaws and then the policies for the personal property itself. So that relationship between the insurance agent and that purchaser is going to be really important in setting the expectations for who's responsible for what in these scenarios.
So we're going to get to disaster assistance here in just a second, but just one more question, Gilbert. Tim in the chat had mentioned about how so many homes flooded during Harvey, which I know was its own total different random thing, but so many homes generally, like you said, can flood even if they're not in a floodplain. So why is it important, or is it important to get flood insurance if you're not in a floodplain?
That's a great question. And here's some experiences I had. In 2015, my first disaster was 4222 in Oklahoma, Midwest floodings. And ever since then, I have seen this trend. And the trend is 60% of the damaged structures were outside of FEMA identified special flood hazard areas. And unfortunately, every disaster I have worked since have been over 50% of the damaged structures have been outside of the special flood hazard areas. Now, there could be several reasons for this, but one of the reasons is that FEMA has an agreement with communities who participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a quid pro quo system. And by enforcing floodplain management regulations, the community is eligible for affordable flood insurance. Okay, so those floodplain regulations do not extend outside of those special flood hazard areas. So inside of those areas, they have requirements such as building the lowest floor to at base flood elevations or higher. A lot of communities have adopted what's called freeboard or higher standards to provide a better and a higher level of protection for their citizens. We don't see that type of requirements outside of the special flood hazard area, leading to more flooding. And as Yi said, the flood insurance rate maps or firms are nothing but a snapshot in time. And currently, there's just a line on a piece of paper stating if the house is inside or outside of that special flood hazard area. That line is not going to stop water. It's simply not going to do it. So the water is going to follow the path of least resistance. And if we have a lot of areas that have built up foundations, the water is going to flow other places. Drainage could help, flood control measures, retention ponds can help, but ultimately it can lead to additional flooding in areas outside of the special flood hazard area. And we see this in Houston. If it rains, I guarantee you, no matter how light the rain is, there is going to be a street in Houston that floods. That's the way it goes. When you combine that amount of construction, that amount of growth on already taxed master drainage systems, which are overloaded and can't handle the velocities that they see now. So yes, if you're outside of the special flood hazard area, I encourage you to have flood insurance. The
And what
entire
about
country. Let me say
No,
this
go
one
ahead.
thing.
Sure.
It's easier for you to understand this if you think about the entire country as a floodplain. There's just different levels of flood risk. So it can flood anywhere in the country. It's just a question of what risk you actually live in.
That's
And-
what insurance is all about, right? That's exactly right. There you go. Yee, go ahead.
And just to add to Gil's point, I know a lot of times the special flood hazard areas are commonly referred to as the 100-year floodplain, which is commonly misunderstood. It does not mean that it's only going to flood there once every 100 years. It does not mean because it just flooded, you've got another 99 years and you're good for another flood. And even if you were in a severe flood event such as Harvey and you weren't flooded, that doesn't mean a future event won't impact you. So going back to the 100-year flood, what that means is that in any given year, there's a 1% chance of that flood occurring or something being exceeded. And so that risk is still there over the term of a 30-year mortgage. Those statistics equate to having a 26% chance of your home being inundated by a 100-year flood. So,
And what about
more-
the 500-year floodplain, the Zone B on some maps?
Yeah, so again, it doesn't mean that you're only going to flood once every 500 years. It means there's a 0.2% chance of a flood of that capacity being equaled or exceeded in any given year. It doesn't mean that you're not, you're technically out of the flood zone. You're not required to have flood insurance, but really it just means there's still a risk, less risk based on the snapshot of modeling that FEMA did at the time that they created those maps, but the risk is always still there.
If you have, just to follow up, if you have questions like Valerie had a point about where she lives in Kerr County, there's the whole area is pretty much subject to flooding. Who can you contact locally to ask about that? Is there a specific office or person? You just call the mayor, or what do you do?
Yeah, so every community that participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, there are 1,258 in Texas, both incorporated cities and unincorporated counties, has a floodplain administrator that, their role is to help with the managing floodplains, regulating development in the floodplains and things of that nature. So we can always help you get in touch with your local floodplain administrator if you've got more locally specific questions. That's what we're here for. Feel free to reach out to me for that.
Fantastic. So, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the seller's disclosure form that each seller for a property has to fill out. Recently, I think it was the last session that was updated to include more specific flood zone information. So Gilbert or Reagan, can y'all or Yee talk about a little bit about those new requirements?
Yes, I can, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The requirements, I think, were needed and are very important. One of the biggest issues I deal with as a liaison is getting phone calls from homeowners who have just closed on a home, and during the closing process, they were quoted, let's just say $500–600 for a flood insurance policy, and all of a sudden, after the closing, the policy is reviewed. Come to find out, there's a prior flood loss history, 2 to 3 of them, now changing that flood insurance policy to $2,000–3,000 a year. New homeowners didn't budget for that; they can't afford this, but we can't do anything about it because flood insurance, we go off of the structure, not necessarily the owners, right? We care about the longevity of the home. So if there is a prior flood loss, it stays with the house. It doesn't move simply because it's sold, it changed hands. So having that new verbiage in these disclosures require that verbiage that is known by FEMA and known by our state partners at Texas Water Development Board, to educate new owners about the peril of that area. They go into more in depth about the differences between the 100-year, the 500-year. They ask, has the house experienced any flooding event? And more importantly, any flood loss history, including NFIP or private flood insurance policies. This is a lot of good information that prospective homeowners need to know to make informed decisions about the risk of the area they're moving into. So I think it's very important. I think it was a great move to expand the disclosure. And we've been very successful in doing presentations to our real estate professionals throughout the state. And we have received a lot of comments that it was well received and that the questions are not overly difficult to help the homeowners answer. And, you know, it's just one of those things I think was needed, and I'm glad it took place.
Thanks, Gilbert. So let's shift the conversation now a little bit to post-storm. What happens after a storm comes through your community for a homeowner who's owned their home, has a problem, calls their realtor, their house fairy godmother or house fairy godfather, and says, "What do we do at this point?" David, what does TWIA do after a storm? What does that look like for your organization, but also just generally for a community?
Yeah, so the first thing that I'll do is some of the material that we provided is it's called our adjusters leave behind. It probably is the best way to set some expectations for TWIA's actions post-storm. But kind of stepping back a second and looking at generally what will happen post-storm, you know, obviously Texas windstorm, it's not just for hurricanes. You know, we have squall lines that come through Texas, you know, just like we do up in the Panhandle, we get hailstorms down on the coast. And really, in general, something to kind of project to the policyholder or to the prospective buyer is that, you know, for TWIA especially, filing a claim is not going to impact their rates. That can be the case on the private insurance side. However, with TWIA, you know, we always encourage folks, if there is any sort of question, file a claim. You know, we want to serve as a partner with our policyholders, and so in doing that by filing that claim, we're able to begin that investigation, to begin to find some cause and origin of whatever that damage might be. So the first thing that I think people should be aware of after that storm, whether that be a hailstorm, a tornado, a regular thunderstorm, or a hurricane, is that they need to understand the structure itself. What does the history of any sort of losses, the history of the damage of the structure itself, what does that look like? How historically has the structure responded to wind-driven rain and you know, generally strong winds? Understanding what sort of shingles do I have up there? You know, I don't need to be a construction expert, but understanding that I might have 10-year-old shingles. If you're living down on the Texas coast and you've got 10-year-old 3-tab shingles, even laminate shingles, it's likely that we're looking at some brittleness there. And you can have a lot of repairability issues where you could be looking at a full roof replacement for slight damage. And so understanding how all of your home kind of works with one another and the topography and the geography of the surrounding area is really important. There's a lot of patterns that show themselves whenever a storm or any sort of you know, severe weather interacts with an area. And so I think encouraging that prospective buyer from the agent side is really important to ensure that they are kind of taking ownership of the structure itself and their relationship with whatever insurance provider they have there. Along with that, you know, encouraging them to understand their inventory. What sort of personal property do I have? You know, how expensive is it? You know, one of the things that I do whenever I leave my home at any point in time is that I'm going to go around, I'm going to take a video, and I'm just going to take a video of all the little things that I have. And even that in and of itself can help on the back end of a claim and to get more information to the, whether it's TWIA or whatever insurance provider is there. The more information that we can get from the policyholder, the quicker we can come to a resolution on the claim itself. So post-storm, I think having a understanding prior to that storm of what your structure is likely to do, and then understanding what the specifics of your the interior, the kitchen, the bedrooms, And again, it's not about being an expert in construction. It's about being an expert in your home and in your environment. And so I think if you can project that towards the prospective purchaser, I think that puts them in a very good position and can set some expectations for what they can expect on the back end of a claim. TWIA sometimes does operate a little bit differently than the private market. And so I would really, work closely with your insurance provider and not be scared to interact with them and to push them on things. Make us work, make your insurance agent work. That's what we're here to do.
Thanks, David. Those are some good points. Yee, what does Texas Water Development Board have available post-storm?
Sure. So a lot of our guidance is, directed more towards floodplain administrators. But as a homeowner, if you've got damage to your home, aside from, getting in touch with your insurance agents and making a claim, always make sure you check with the local floodplain administrator to see if you need a permit or what the regulatory requirements for rebuilding in your home are. Because if you're in a special flood hazard area, any work that you do will need a permit, and you'll need to check with them on the local regulations. And they can provide you with more advice of, potential local funding, any other sort of information that might help you with rebuilding.
So I know we're getting close to 10 o'clock, about 10 minutes left, and it was advertised as a 1-hour webinar. We can probably fudge that number a little bit and go past. So just letting everybody who's watching know, because there's a lot of information to cover. There's been a lot of questions. Also, any questions that you ask that we don't get to in the chat, we will respond to after the webinar in writing. And we will be sending out some materials from everyone to all of the registered participants. So thanks again for participating. But I want to keep going because we still have a lot to go over. First, I wanted to ask Manny or Reagan, what are some things that homeowners can do to mitigate some of this loss that may come either from a coastal storm or some of these storms up in North Texas, the hail, the tornadoes, but especially since we're in that time of year, just what you can do around the coast.
Let me first, and I'm going to defer to Reagan afterwards, going off of David's comments regarding what the future homeowners' expectations are. And it's critical in the coastal area is when they start to rebuild is making sure they get a proper certified person who knows what they're doing. Because it's required that homeowners build to windstorm standards from the ground up. If it's destroyed, they got to rebuild to certain windstorm standards that are conducted by engineers. TDI also has a free program in which we inspect the installation of windows and doors, siding, garage doors, and the roof to make sure that they're correcting or they're putting on the correct roof or the siding that meets the windstorm standards. So it's critical and it's important because many times after a storm, you get folks coming from outside the state, outside the county that are there just to make a quick buck. And it is important that they don't immediately get a quote and go with it. I would suggest they contact TDI. That way we can meet the contractor if they're going to install a new roof. Because it's critical, there's a lot of fraud that occurs after a storm. And that's one point I want to make sure that people, our realtors, explain to their clients that afterwards on reconstruction that there is a requirement to build to windstorm standards after the storm and to make sure to get the honest contractor and roofer and know what to look for to better be prepared and make sure it's done the right way. Reagan?
I just sent a little, sorry, I turned my camera off. I sent a little web link to TDI's webpage on, it's a big homeowners insurance piece. One piece of that is saving money on your insurance, and it goes into lots of different ways that homeowners can explore to lower their premiums. And there's some of the things that, make easy sense. Get a burglar alarm, fire alarm, sprinkler systems, newer windows, newer doors. All of these things impact your rates, but also help keep your home safe. These are some of the simple things that you can do. There are also flood mitigation devices you can put near your hot water heater. If it detects water, it sends an alarm off. So instead of having 8 inches of water in your house, you get, 8 ounces of water in your house. Those type of things can certainly help mitigate losses before they get really out of hand. And so I would recommend exploring our webpage for some of these tips and tricks.
Yeah, and I'm gonna second that, Reagan, because I had no clue before I started working with everyone on this panel when we started a few months ago getting together. TDI website has a ton of information. Insurance is complicated, and not everyone is gonna know everything about it, because those policies are thick and worded by lawyers who are the worst at writing to make things complicated, or the best to make things complicated, I should say. And so getting on, using those resources that you have, like at TDI, videos that explain, how hurricanes work and the damages that they can cause and the resources that they have available, I would recommend double checking that, directing folks to homeowners to look at that, potential homeowners, just so that they have a better understanding. David, do you have a point to add?
Yeah, I was going to pick up on something Manny was talking about, and this is really important for real estate agents. I've seen this play out in claims before, after storms, and this can really put a policyholder in a tough position. And it goes back to understanding the code environment that you live in. So along the 14 coastal counties, part of the TWIA eligibility process is having what's called a WPI-8 for new construction and really any sort of repairs that meet certain standards. So larger than 100 square feet of a roof, more than 10% of any one elevation, et cetera. Again, TDI's website is fantastic and provides a lot of information for that. But one thing that we've seen after a storm is when there has been a transfer in title of a property, if there is not an understanding of the loss history of that structure, let's say that somebody had filed a claim in 2019, and they went and got their roof replaced, maybe half of the roof, but they did not go get a WPI-8 while that process of putting that roof was going on. Now, if that transfer and if that purchase of the home happens and there is not a WPI-8 issued for that replaced damage, then if that new policyholder purchases a TWIA policy and has a loss, then whenever we go back and let's say that there's damage to that side of the roof again, if there's not a WPI-8 issued for that, then that might not be part of what's covered under the claim. And so it's extremely important for on the front end of any sort of purchase of a home in the TWIA coverage area that they understand the history of the WPI-8. There's a very easy to use search function on the TDI website. And there's also a new tool that the legislature put in place for a post-construction certification that policyholders can get if they find this to be the case. So let's say that they purchase the home, they find out that there was a new elevation, new siding put on, and they can go back, engage with TDI, engage with an engineer, and go through the process of getting that certified so that that can become eligible for TWIA coverage. And it is something, it doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, it can be the difference between somebody getting their roof replaced and covered under their policy and not. And so I think it's a really good place to highlight the need for our real estate agents to understand the code environment in which we live.
Just to add on to that, TDI has a free program, and a lot of folks don't know about that. Just simply call TDI and we'll be happy to refer you to the Windstorm program. But the free program is where our inspectors, we have field offices in Corpus Christi, Beaumont, and the Valley. Not the Valley, but Angleton, where they're wanting to meet with the homeowners who plan to install a new roof, and we'll be there to assist them in getting it certified to Windstorm standards and getting the WPI 8 certification, which is part of the eligibility requirements with Texas Windstorm.
Yeah, and those are all good points, Manny and David. Thanks. Yeah, those websites, these resources are available to everyone. So it's almost 10 o'clock. I wanted to talk to Gilbert a little bit before everybody gets off. You'd mentioned earlier mucking the floor, and Reagan had mentioned 8 feet of water instead of 8 ounces of water. What happens when this water gets into your home? Why is it dangerous? And what are some of the consequences on that as far as mitigation and stuff afterwards?
So when we do have a flooding event, first and foremost, FEMA's responsibility is life-saving measures. We won't even start recovery until we are ensured that everyone who is at risk has been rescued or has a lifeline or a way to evacuate. When homeowners are allowed to go back into their homes or their areas, they could actually initiate flood claims remotely. They can call their agents and say, I want to start the claim process. Let's start the ball rolling so we get an adjuster assigned and get back into it. And then when they actually can get to their house, this is where the record keeping that was mentioned earlier comes in so important. By maintaining videos or photographs of items that you have in your house can help you fill out the proof of loss form that's going to be required to submit your flood insurance claim. Now, this process is not it's not easy and it's not fast. These documentation has to be filled out correctly, has to be signed by the adjusters, has to be sent to FEMA for review. Now, FEMA has, we have streamlined our process, and we do offer advance payment almost immediately when large scale events happen. So people will have money immediately to help with the general clean out, removing of the debris, taking it to the curb where it would normally be picked up by the community. But as I mentioned, this is something that will take time. As you can imagine, we have 5 million policies across the country. During Hurricane Harvey, I forget, we had over 80,000 claims. So each one of those claims are going to require an adjuster to go out there and look at the house. Well, you now add in a element of the COVID-19 where we're worried about the safety of our insured and our adjusters. So we're doing what's called remote adjusting. And that requires a level of cooperation from the insured to be able to provide the remote adjusting information, such as measurements of maybe counters or walls, or being able to walk outside showing the foundation measurements. So we add in another element which can add on a little bit more time to get these claims processed and get the money to the insured. But we are learning. We did do remote adjusting for Hurricane Hannah, which was a small event, a little bit less than 1,000 claims. And we didn't have any major issues. One of the things we anticipate coming up if Hurricane Laura does make landfall is having to take in consideration prior flood loss history in regards to adjusting. But that's something that we'll tackle when we get to that bridge. That answered that question?
Yeah, and then even more specifically on a smaller level, what happens after all that stuff happens? I get the sheetrock off and my studs are covered in black fuzzy stuff.
Yeah, my advice is to not rush to repair your home. I know people want to get back into their life. They want to start the process of rebuilding, but you have to ensure that the home has been properly cleaned and that it is dry completely before you rebuild, because once you put that drywall back up, you won't see the mold growing behind the scenes. And there's reputable contractors will have the equipment necessary to determine if moisture is still in the bones of your home, the framing of the home. It's normally just wood, and if it's not dry completely, you have all the elements to have mold grow in the home, and that's going to require you to basically demolish it all over again to clean the mold and have to redo the process. So I understand during a flooding event, people want to get back into their normal way of life, but you have to ensure that the cleaning process was done complete and as thorough as possible to avoid situations like this. Don't forget, the flooding peril was one aspect, but you have to worry about the health measures that certain types of mold can cause with prolonged exposure. It's not worth the risk. Make sure it's done correctly. A lot of organizations can give you people to help you demolish your house and get it ready for repair. That's great, but make sure you have someone who knows and what they're doing, has the experience to test for moisture before the rebuilding process actually starts.
That's great information, Manny. Thanks. So listen, everyone, we're just past 10 o'clock. I really want to respect everybody's time. I'd like to thank our panelists, Yi, Manny, David, Gilbert, Reagan. Tim, thank you so much for joining us from your office there in Lubbock as a TWIA board member. What I'd like to do now, and thank you to all of our attendees. Like I said, we'll be following up with everyone with all of our resources, additional information that you can use. I see that Manny just posted in the chat that contact information for those field offices. Victoria, you had a question about that. So thank you everyone who attended. Robin, I'd like to throw it back over to you to wrap things up.
Great, thank you, Robin. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. Texas Realtors will, like Robin said, they're going to send out a follow-up email. And I know there was a lot of information added as far as resources that's not on the list here that I have posted. So we're going to be adding those as well. And I hope you found this information helpful. You guys, please stay safe out there. I know Laura's coming our way, so please keep everybody in her path and your thoughts. Stay weather aware. Try tuning in to all your local officials. I know Texas Division of Emergency Management and our Office of the Governor is constantly putting current information on their Facebook page and their website, so please follow them. Stay safe out there. Thanks again for joining us. Take care. And that concludes our webinar today.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.